I remember somebody telling me that Joe Biden couldn't be pushed on something like Medicare for all. So Medicare for all was a waste of time. Don't push them on Medicare for all. Don't force the vote on Medicare for all. Don't do that. That is a waste of our time and energy and powers. And however, $15 an hour, that is something we can push him on. That is something we should expend time and energy on. That is what we should be doing on the left, quote unquote, in Congress. And forced the vote basically went to the wayside. And this notion of flexing your power went to the wayside. And the thought was, well, why do you need to push Joe Biden on something that Joe Biden said he already agreed to? And is it possible that you didn't believe Joe Biden was going to back $15 an hour, despite the fact that Joe Biden said it? Is it possible that you knew better, despite the fact that people were told, from the standpoint of the left, that this was something that Biden was backing? More importantly, Biden, during the campaign, vocally said he was for $15 an hour. Gets in the White House, vocally says he's for $15 an hour. But the reality of it is, they were willing to ditch that $15 an hour in a heartbeat, on a whim. And the question was he ever really for it? I don't believe he was ever really for it. What I think is Biden told people what he believed they needed to hear in order for him to get into office. So if he wants to say these heroes deserve $15 an hour, and Trump says, no, I'm not for that, well, between the two, 500,000 people have died. More than that. And the people that have died have been poor, middle class, mostly. Many of which, people of color, many of which were at those stores, at those factories, in a way that we were being serviced. People who basically could stay at home and work were being serviced. Basically, the poor, once again, gave their lives for the wealthier of this nation. Joe Biden said it was a starvation wage. He said that out of office. He said that when he got into office. And he made the point that our heroes, people that have been dying and have their lives at risk, it is a crime, ethically and morally, for those people to have put their lives at risk in such a way, whether they were forced to or not, is secondary to the point. And then go home and remain on a starvation wage that is ethically and morally repugnant. And yet, Joe Biden has basically told the American workers that despite the fact that he said he was going to get them $15 an hour, that they are not worth it for whatever particular reason. Thanks for your votes, suckers. But no, I don't think you're worth $15 an hour. I'm Joe Biden. Because what am I to take away from Joe Biden on this? He had the power to do it. He just chose not to do it. He had the bully pulpit. He chose not to use it. He had the ability to go behind the scenes and put a foot in Manchin's ass. He chose not to do it. He could have used the gravitas of the office. He chose not to do it. And even when you look at the standpoint of getting rid of the parliamentarian or getting rid of the filibuster, all of these things were powers within the president's disposal from the at least to push for those things. Even from the standpoint of making sure that $15 an hour was in the stimulus, you had a House, you had a Senate, and you had the president. The House put it in the bill. The Senate took it out. Who's the middle guy in this? Who's the guy that is the determining factor in this? Is it the president? And what I mean by that is, which way does the wind blow? Who's going to push in a particular direction? Is it the president? No, because the president didn't really believe in it. And the House of Representatives, including lefties, who were supposed to be the bitter enders in fighting for this stuff, also didn't put much of a fight. It was removed, it was voted upon, and it was passed. And Joe Biden, negotiating entirely with himself, without removing any of the strings that bind him in regards to him affecting America's agenda, he passes a COVID bill without what he told the American public he was going to give them: $15 an hour. 550,000 Americans have died as a result of the malfeasance of the government. And that doesn't go into the fact of the people that lost their jobs, the companies and the businesses that were damaged by that, even from the context of the small businesses that were supposed to get some level of help. And that money ends up being dumped into the hands of the rich and the wealthy companies. And yet, after all of that, American workers are still not worth $15 an hour. I don't understand why the Democratic Party hates the poor so. Why? I have no idea. And yet, these are the people that they want to vote for them. And they would even argue that it is a privileged position to not vote for a random Democrat, despite the fact that these random Democrats don't necessarily think that workers are worth $15 an hour. And apparently, the lefties in the batch aren't necessarily willing to go to the mat for it. Ilhan Omar is having a conversation with Mehdi Hassan, and this word salad of an answer, when he makes the point of asking her, why doesn't it look like you guys are fighting hard, especially for the provisions of the lefty provisions? In my case, I'm specifically talking about the $15 an hour. But why doesn't it look like you guys are fighting hard? Her answer is disastrous on so many levels. One of those is that it is exactly what I thought. The president didn't care about it. He threw that out there entirely as a fishing line to get people to bite onto this notion that they, the 40 million people that make less than $15 an hour, that they were going to get a raise based on the president of the United States. That didn't happen. He threw them over the wayside immediately. And Mehdi Hassan's question is on point. Because the catch becomes, just because the president wasn't necessarily for it, are you telling me that there were no plans, no agendas, nothing within the context of your group of people supposedly with the like mind, so much so that they delineate you from the rest of the Democratic Party and call you the squad? There was nothing that you guys could do to do something in that process. The only thing you can do is capitulate. And I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. And that is massively unsatisfying because it's not necessarily true. I'm going to let you hear her answer. And I want to talk about it. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. I think my computer is about to screw up again, so if it does, forgive me. This video is aggravating. Let's get to the video, just in case I have any time before this thing craps up.
Big picture. It was reported by Politico that you were part of a congressional Progressive Caucus delegation that recently met with White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain. What asks did you make, and what do you say to your critics on the left who say progressives in Congress like yourself, the Squad, the CPC, haven't pushed Biden hard enough on issues like the $15 minimum wage, universal health care, the filibuster?
I mean, it is because that we have been pushing really that the American Rescue Plan is deemed to be the most progressive policy in decades. We certainly understand that there was a failed strategy, not by the progressives in Congress, because we put $15 in the package, by the administration. I think their early signaling that could be negotiated out, and it might not stick as part of the final package, really, I think, endangered the ability for us to pass $15. And so when we were in that meeting, we pushed for a strategy to get $15 minimum wage. We pushed for a strategy to pass the agenda that the administration ran on, that the Democrats agree on, whether it is, passing sensible gun laws, dealing with our immigration crisis, and all of the things that we all care about. What we walked away from that conversation with is an understanding that there is a limited window of opportunity for us to push these pieces of legislation. There are members in the Senate within the Democratic Party that are certainly not there yet on the priority pieces of legislation that we have. And it's going to be up to the administration to come up with a strategy to push them, because progressives in the House are constantly told to get in line and to push policies that are going to have an impact on people's lives. That's what those Democrats in the Senate need to be told, and that's what's going to take.
I don't understand. It basically sounds like Joe Biden wasn't for it, so fuck it. Right? Joe Biden wasn't for it, so fuck it. The Senate has to get in line. Here's the thing. The Senate has no more right to deal or put a policy into a particular bill than you do. Meaning, in the same way that you put it in and they take it out, you can put it back in. And I get that there's this limited window. By the same token, understand what we're talking about here. 40 million people, the impact of that. And whether Joe Biden backed it or not is honestly almost irrelevant. The fact that the president of the United States has said, you can trust me. All right, fair enough. I'm not going to lie to you. Okay, fair enough. I am for $15 an hour. Okay, fair enough. As president, I am for $15 an hour. Okay, fair enough. So whether Biden behind the scenes is not for it or not is irrelevant. Joe Biden has made vocal statements about being for it. And by the way, he does that often. He often backs policies vocally that he doesn't really back in real terms. The union thing, if you remember at the press conference, the only time Joe Biden really raised his voice or did anything that looked, less low energy, it was on unions. And it was almost like, he was hypnotized into it, where he would go dead eyes and be like, unions built America. Okay, what was I saying? And he would go back to whatever he was saying. It was very strange. But there's a policy that Joe Biden can enact. He just doesn't. This is kind of the point that I'm making here. This is not a situation where you have a Democratic House, a Republican governor, and a Republican Senate. You have all branches of government, and with all branches of government, you have the power to enact all of that. That's the point that I'm making here. Joe Biden has a Senate. That Senate only needs 51 votes. They can get rid of the filibuster if they needed to invoke America's agenda. They just don't. And they could have did the exact same thing by getting rid of the parliamentarian. They just didn't. By the same token, you could have put it back in the bill, and you could have screamed to high heaven that Joe Manchin and the Democrats in the Senate are ripping the food out of babies' mouths. And on top of ripping the food out of babies' mouths, scream, why do you hate the American worker so much? Why do you hate them so much? And start screaming that the president of the United States is for this. The president of the United States said these heroes should not have these starvation wages. And how dare you rip the food out of babies' mouths by making this bill last one more week longer, as opposed to backing this bill and backing America's agenda and backing what the president wanted. Yeah, you could argue in those terms. You could put those things back into the bill. You could have threatened to crash the bill. I'm making the point that Joe Manchin and the Democrats in the Senate were willing to crash that bill. They didn't care about the quote-unquote time constraints. And on top of not caring about the time constraints that you, for whatever particular reason, was supposed to care about all that much, you've allowed a certain degree of theater that has not served you well. On one point, you allow certain Democrats that probably didn't back $15 an hour in the House of Representatives to put their name up as if they did, knowing that the Senate was never going to pass it, meaning it was going to be a bit of theater because the president was never going to get behind it. On top of doing that, you also allow a president that doesn't back this to pretend as if he does, and never has to enunciate to the American public one way or the other about where he stands. You have no power to force Biden to push this through. Fair enough. But that's not really the argument I'm making here. I'm making the argument that what you do have the power is to take a pound of flesh. If Joe Biden is going to take this tack that I'm going to play this slick politics where I'm going to put this out to the American public, all of these people have died. All of these people have illnesses. All of these people who've lost their jobs and businesses. But I'm going to dangle out $15 an hour to a desperate population. And then when I get into politics, I'm going to have the smooth politics of passing the bill without the 15, with the thought that with the bill passing, nobody would pay attention to the fact that 40 million people were cheated out of $15 an hour. Biden gets to basically slide by backing a position that he never backed without having to say he never backed it. And because you guys weren't willing to potentially crash this bill in the same way that Joe Manchin and the Democrats in the Senate were willing to crash that bill, you allowed him to skate on that nonsense. I'm saying that you should have taken a pound of flesh, that the politics of it itself demanded you take a pound of flesh. Make Joe Biden get out there and say, I am not for this. We need to get this COVID bill through. Wrap this shit up and let's go. Screaming that Biden has the capacity to get rid of the parliamentarians. Screaming that Biden has the capacity to basically use the bully pulpit if he really did indeed back the policy. I guess I'm making the point that the fact that Biden said he backed it, a pound of flesh, would be him having to come to account and saying he no longer backed that policy. Now, whether he did that or not, who knows? What you may have is many of the Democrats that are in the House all of a sudden voting against the $15 an hour minimum wage, or all of them turning around and pointing fingers at you saying you guys are holding up the process despite the fact that the Senate was willing to push the bill on hold for a week. Food that were going to babies, mamas, the $1,400 wasted another week because Joe Manchin and the Senate Democrats hated the poor, hated the workers that much, or they didn't want to give them $15 an hour. This is an unsatisfying answer because it feels like, or it seems like, there's no independent association within the context of quote unquote the squad. That it didn't even seem to consider that pushing it, meaning if they are indeed against a deadline, that they themselves are something separate and distinct from the rest of the party. I don't think that at this point. I mean, whether they realize it or not, they are Democrats, even though Democrats don't see them as Democrats. And both of those things are true. From the standpoint of the squad and from the standpoint of the people who basically consider themselves quote unquote progressive Democrats, they back the party. When it counts, when it's necessary, they back the party. Even in some situations where it's not necessary, where they can balk and try to get additional policy, they back the party. I have a hard time seeing how this is different than just being a Democrat. And what's weirder and what's sucky about this, at one turn after the next, the Democratic Party find ways to put knives in you. They stick a knife in you and AOC at every opportunity. The DSCC and the DCCC, if you remember, they were pushing through policy to make it difficult for you and people like AOC to ever get in office again, meaning the new types have a harder time getting in office as a result of the policies and the rules that they were making, blacklisting organizations if they were challenging incumbents. They did that to you. Do you remember when they used that, calling you anti-Semitic because you said it's all about the Benjamins? Who attacked you? Your own party attacked you for that, trying to injure you for the person who's going to be running against you. And yet, when every opportunity presents itself, there you are. There you are, ready to just back the Democratic agenda whole hog. $15 an hour. Did you believe in it or don't you? And I actually do believe you believe in it. By the same token, there seems to be a stunning failure of imagination in regards to what's necessary in order to hold either the party accountable or even, at the very least, make a stand for the millions of Americans that expected that money. Joe Biden should have been forced to say, I am not for this, or we need to get this COVID bill moving, or at the very least have a voice to point out what is currently taking place right now with the President of the United States breaking a promise. Even if you were drowned out, even if nobody else was going to say anything, at the very least to have a voice in the wilderness, candle in the darkness, saying the President is abandoning his promise and 40 million people are going to be to the worst ends based on what Joe Biden is doing. But no, President wasn't for it. So fuck it. She could have said that in like 8 words. Yeah, that's an unsatisfying answer. That's so unsatisfying. Because it seems like there is no context. Like, does the squad work as a unit? Or they just call it the squad? Where they're just kind of these individual elements that are kind of floating about. Where the organization and the unity within the context of them talking and working through policy and that type of stuff. Because that doesn't seem to exist. And honestly, at this point, taking what AOC said in that other interview, I have a hard time seeing how the conversations that they're making are any different than Democrats. This is the most progressive legislation in 50 years. Well, yeah, but that's like a tall little person. If something is 4 foot tall, that's not necessarily, this brimming stature. There was nothing else to compare it to. So it's just that. There's nothing else taking that spot. Meaning it's not saying anything. And what you're comparing it to, honestly, doesn't entirely even make sense. 500,000 people died. 550,000, died over the course of a year. And the best thing that you guys are doing is basically politics as usual. Yes, you passed the bill. Good job. You passed it amongst yourself, and even then you negotiated the bill down. So calm down with the most progressive thing ever. The thing that would have helped all of these people that were out there, that were fighting and at these jobs, would have been $15 an hour. And that is the thing. 42% of the public was making $18,000 a year before COVID. What do you think they're making now? Meaning, do you think that's better or worse at the edge of this particular process? And if you think that's worse, and the federal government called those people heroes, shouldn't those people make a livable wage? And that's a livable wage is defined by the Democratic Party, which is $15 an hour. The President of the United States was $15 an hour. And he said anything less than that is a starvation wage. And yet, broken promise, here we are. And nobody was around to call it out because everybody just kind of bowed their heads and went along with it because according to her, there's a limited amount of time for legislation to pass. And so you gotta, just go with it. Like, share.